we go. All right, here we go. We are in the middle of chapter 12. This is the chapter where the Alter Rebbe finally addresses the Beinoni. And remember, we call it Tanya, but the Alter Rebbe calls it the Book of the Beinoni. And the idea of the Beinoni, as we have explained it, not like it's commonly thought of as a guy who's kind of average or the mean, but he is rather one whose conduct, which includes his conscious thoughts, his spoken words, and his actual deeds, is identical with the tzaddik, and one whose inner struggle is identical with the Rasha. Now, the Alter Rebbe has pointed out the most last few lines that the Beinoni can also experience tzaddik-like sort of non-conflict during what is described as itim mizumanim, which is a plural. Ace mizuman would be the singular. Special designated times. Now, what makes these special designated times? So he uses an example. It's not limited to this example. It's an example, which is when a person has an intense davening. Now, when we say an intense davening, we don't just mean because he's reading the words of the siddur. Of course, that's the beginning, and he's reading them with great attentiveness. Of course, that's crucial. It is when he is so transformed, so uplifted, that in those moments he can't even imagine anything other than his desire to be aligned with Hashem. Now, unfortunately, when davening ends, the boost is removed, and he comes back down into the struggle. And you can only imagine us aspiring Beinonim have probably had some similar experience in our own lives, where we are in a moment where we feel total alignment and enthusiasm with the infinity of Hashem, and we set the alarm to get up early. But when the alarm goes off, somehow that great inspiration has get up and gone. And now we're back to the struggle. So the Alter Rebbe is, making us aware of this so that we don't mistakenly persuade ourselves that we are immune to any form of challenge. That's one. Additionally, the Alter Rebbe is reminding us that this is an opportunity to have somewhat of a break from the continuous difficult struggle. And the Alter Rebbe is telling us that even though that boost will go away, we can still have some residue of that we can carry with us out into the rest of our lives. So don't just despair and think, well, it's gone, it'll never come back. So what was the point of the whole exercise? Why should I ever have anything joyous when I know I'm going to have tzoros tomorrow? Well, there is not only the momentary respite from the struggle, there is also the residual impact that we hope to carry on until at least the next boost experience that we have. Now, in yesterday's Parsha, we have a reference to this similar idea that we spoke about on Shabbos, that Bilam, in his thwarted attempt to curse the Jewish people, where he winds up blessing them, he says that God sees no avoin, which we loosely translate as sin, in Jacob, and no amal in Yisroel. Now, the word amal in context is translated as a form of sin, but the most literal translation of that is the term for labor or struggle. And this is what Bilam is saying, that when the Jewish people are at this exalted level that is described as Yisroel, not the entry level that is described as Yaakov, then they have no struggle. They have total clarity. They have absolute alignment with the infinity of Hashem. They know who they are. They know where they want to be. They know where they're going. They are completely tethered to their outcome, and they have no distraction, and therefore no struggle or no labor in their service of Hashem. That is where the Beinoni is during these itim mizumanim. So, of course, the Alter Rebbe anticipates the question, so why is it so difficult? So I dive in, I'm so totally, absolutely aligned with the infinity of Hashem. I want nothing more than to be aligned with Hashem. I want nothing other than to be aligned with Hashem. So why is it so hard? Well, unfortunately, there's an answer. And that's where it continues here. Rak, b'nei shaloi loi levadoi, and that's the crucial word, mishpat hamalucha v'hamamshala be'ir. Because it, or he, which is a reference to the godly soul, does not have, and that's the word levadoi, exclusive authority over the city. Now, the city is a reference to the analogy introduced by King Solomon that we've talked about, that a person is described as a city, and just as a city has many resources, and you have two competing, mutually exclusive, that's a significant aspect, mutually exclusive forces competing for absolute exclusive dominance over this city, to access to and control over all of its resources, which within the person is all of their thoughts, all of their character or emotions, as we describe it, all of their tools of speech and action and so forth. And each one wants absolute exclusive dominion. So the Nefesh Elokis, the godly soul, does not have exclusive authority. So it's back into the mix, back into the challenge. Now, again, we might ask, well, then what's the purpose of this exercise that I get a respite from it for an hour while I daven? When the davening's over, I know, boom, I'm going to be right back into the struggle. So on the one hand, we say, well, we'll live in the moment. If I get a moment of respite, I'm going to seize that moment. Additionally, it's the residue of that experience that we can call upon when the challenge comes. So back to my simple analogy. The person has an ace mezuman, they have an inspired moment, and they make the resolution, tomorrow I'm getting up early to do mitzvahs. So they set their alarm for earlier. Now the alarm goes off, and now they're not feeling that great inspiration. Now they're feeling the struggle about whether they should indulge their desire to sleep or they should get up. So they're torn back and forth. So what is the value of this? Because they can remember that there was a time last night when they set the alarm when they felt so absolutely aligned. So even though they're not feeling that now, but the memory of it becomes a booster to get them over the top. And since the success of the Beinoni is always in the actual, that is the concentrated thought, the spoken word, and the deed, that's where the Beinoni wins. The residual awareness and memory of that experience of the Ace Mezuman gives him the boost to get over it. Therefore, you say, "And yochel taivasu mekayach halapoyel l'slavish revi aguf b'maisa dim machshava mamish lahamik machshavtoi b'tanugi olam haza." So, what happens? The Ace Mezuman passes. The Yetzer Hara, who sort of sits that one out because he knows that he has no capacity in that circumstance. So why should he waste his effort? He knows it's not going to win. But now he is, again, to just use the analogy, he's all rested. And now that the Ace Mezuman has passed, he's all gung-ho, ready to fire back. So he comes roaring back. But since he is not either the exclusive authority, the godly soul is still there. It too is competing for that space of, again, what he's going to think about, what he's going to say, and what he's going to do. Therefore, although, again, as a Beinoni, he has just as strong a distracted temptation as the Rasha. However, the victory point of the Beinoni, where he is successful, is the prevention of the expression of this desire into actuality, in behavior, speech, or thought, literally. That is, we'll get to in a moment, but you notice here, again, on each page is a different layout, but if you have the original Hebrew, it's the last three words of page 32. That's not crucial, but you see that the Alter Rebbe lays out in describing the denial that the godly soul is able to put up against the animal self-serving soul is in the expression of deed, speech, and thought. Now, we are familiar with these terms. We've used them, of course, many times. However, we are more accustomed to seeing them listed in the reversed order: thought, speech, action. Here, the Alter Rebbe says action, speech, thought in the reverse order. So there clearly is that's clearly intentional. So what the Alter Rebbe is alluding to is that the animal soul is much more fixated on and more desirous of the deed than he is of the speech, than he is of the thought. Because remember, with thought in particular, what the self-serving animating soul is interested in thought is just how to get a better idea to do something that is more pleasurable. Remember, we talked about that the impulse goes from the heart to the mind, but not into the mind, because he knows that once he gets to the mind, that's the dominion of the godly soul, and the godly soul is going to talk him out of it. So it's the classic thing. Just tell me what I want to know, and I don't want you asking any more questions. I don't want you poking around and trying to figure out why I want this, and then you're going to talk me out of it. I don't want to be talked out of it. But since I want more sophisticated pleasures than the animal, so an animal has to eat grass because it has no capacity for making anything more sophisticated. So the animal soul goes to the brain and says, give me an idea for how I can have a better pleasure, but don't start asking me all kinds of questions about why I'm pursuing pleasures and not pursuing godliness. So the animal soul, very much, or the self-serving soul, is very much about action, speech, thought. And the God-serving soul is very much about thought, speech, action. Action, speech, thought, speech, action. Now, what does this mean? What is it that the animal soul wants? Lahamik machshavte b'tenu olam haza. Eich lemalois taivas liboy. That the animal soul wants to go to the brain, again, so it can contemplate deeply. That is, not deeply in the sense that it's thinking about the deep meaning of life and so on, but it can have a more sophisticated understanding of how it can fulfill its impulses. So again, my most simplistic example: an animal eats grass because it has no capacity to figure out a recipe or cooking or anything of sophistication. But the self-serving human doesn't just want to have such a simplistic base desire, pleasure. So it goes to the brain and says, figure out a way to make cupcakes, figure out a way to make something more delicious. But what happens? It gets stopped, or it's capable of being stopped. And this is one of the sort of basic truisms that the Alter Rebbe lays out. Ki hamoyach shalat al halev, poshkosav barai mehem, the Parshas Pinchas, b'toldasai, v'teva yitzirasai, shekach noitzer adam b'toldasai, shekol adam yachol b'ritzoyner sheb'moichai, l'sapek b'limshol b'ruach taivasar sheb'liboy, shoylamalois mishalis liboy b'maisa dibur machshava, ulasiach daita legamre mitaivas liboy el lehepech legamre uberfat al tzad kedusha. And that's a lot of words, but this really encapsulates the core message of Tanya. Truly, it's more than a bumper sticker, but it truly encapsulates. So let's first translate the words, and then we'll discuss. Because the mind can override the heart. Again, heart meaning the self-serving impulse. Mind meaning the God-serving impulse. And again, he quotes this from the Zohar. In your birth, that's the way you are born. So this has nothing to do with having a godly soul. This would be true of Gentiles as well. As we see that it's in your innate nature that man is created this way, that we are upright. Our head is higher than our heart, higher than the lower parts of our body, unlike an animal who's horizontal and parallel to the ground, and the mind, the heart, the lower parts of the body are all on one plane. And therefore, there's no reason why we would assume that there's a superior power to the brain, the organ of the brain of an animal, unlike a human being who's upright, head above the heart, above the rest of the body. And therefore, every person, and again, there's that word Adam. And as you recall, the different terms that are used to describe human beings, we talked about this last time. In English, we say the same thing. If you say someone is male, that's a biological description. If you say somebody is a gentleman, that's a character about them. Even though they're both true, it's both describing the same thing, but there's a different intonation about it. Well, the same is true in the terms in Torah. We have basically four terms. Adam, which is the one we're focused on here, from, of course, Adam, the first one, is Aleph, which is the oneness of Hashem, over the Dam, Daled Mem, which the word Dam means blood, but in our context, it means biological function. That when a human being engages his intellect, he is above his biological imperative. I mean, again, the classic thing, an animal doesn't ask, is it okay if I eat this? He sees it, he eats it. He doesn't even think about why he's eating it. Why does an animal spend all his time searching for food? Well, in the zoo, they're being fed, so they don't have to. So what do? They sit there all day and do nothing. They have no greater aspiration. They are purely, exclusively born or organized or conducted by their biological imperative, and that's the entirety of their existence. Adam is a human being who puts the Aleph, the oneness of Hashem, aloof, that which is above him, the capacity of the head to look up and see the infinite expanse of the sky, dominates the biological imperative represented by Dam, blood. And here again, Dam, when he engages that, he can, with his passion that is in the mind, to resist and to dominate, although not to maybe transform, the spirit of his passion that comes from the heart. To what degree? That he will not fulfill the desires of his heart. Again, in action, that's first and foremost, because the animal is most interested in that. Speech and thought. Now, here's the dividing point between the tzaddik and the Beinoni. The Beinoni can, and therefore must, under all circumstances, no matter how delicious it is, engage their intellect. That is, this thing is staring me in the face, but I can look up and see something greater than it. The no thing can challenge the nothing, as we've talked about so many times, or at least I've talked about it. To overcome, that is, to get beyond the impulse. Now, here's the dividing point, though, between the Beinoni and the Tzaddik. The Tzaddik has, at the lower level, quieted this impulse. It doesn't even present itself in any significant fashion. And at the higher level, he's completely transformed that power to become an ally. So again, the Beinoni is not at that level. What level is the Beinoni at? That he can overcome that impulse. He can override the impulse and not allow it to manifest itself. So he can't control that the animal soul will come knocking on his door. That is not within his capacity to control, and it may never be. Now, later, the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 19, it gets easier. But at this point, we're not giving you even that kind of sense of hope. It's always going to be a difficult challenge. You know, we just had Yud Beis Tammuz, which is the liberation of the previous Rebbe from communist imprisonment. And of course, that's a great joy and celebration. However, there was something a little bit sad about it because it resulted in the Frierdiker Rebbe being expelled from Russia. And he wanted to stay in Russia to save Yiddishkeit. And he writes that when he was kicked out of Russia, when he was about 60 years old, because it's also his birthday, he thought, okay, maybe now at 60, I'm going to have some peace of mind, so to speak. But now I have to go to America. And again, at that time, America was not looking like it was going to be a place of Torah. He had to make the declaration that America is not going to be different because the smart people, and I don't mean that sarcastically, the conventional wisdom was America is where Yiddishkeit died. It wasn't going to be thriving in America. It was going to fall apart. So the Beinoni has this infinite struggle, but he always is capable, no excuses, zero tolerance for overcoming it. Remember, the key message of Tanya, struggle is not failure, but failure is failure. Failure is genuinely failure. That is absolutely true. So what can he do? He can prevent it from expressing itself.
Rabbi
So a person,
Epstein?
hey,
Oh, sorry. Can you
yeah,
hear me? Oh,
yeah, yeah.
sorry. Oh, wait. So I'm still stuck on that example you gave before about at the beginning about with getting up in the morning. Like, I don't understand, like, what, so what does he do about it? Like
So
you said that he thinks about being aligned and aware, and that could give him a boost. But how does that change his actions? I'm just confused about that.
okay, so he goes, let's say, to some lecture, some Farbrengen, something, and he becomes so aligned he can't imagine anything other than that. And so he's going to get up early in the morning to do some great
Right.
mitzvah. So he sets his alarm extra early. Now the morning comes and he wakes up, and now he doesn't have that absolute enthusiasm, but he remembers that he did. So even though at that moment he's struggling, should I hit the snooze button or should I get up? The fact that he remembers that he had that alignment, even though he doesn't feel it now, but he remembers it, that's enough to, in fact, get out of bed. He may not be getting out with full on enthusiasm and it's nothing I'd rather do and it's my
Oh, so
greatest
he's
joy,
still
pleasure.
getting, oh, I thought, okay, because I was confused.
That's
I was
what
like,
pushes him to get out of the
I
bed.
know, but I didn't know if you meant like he was oversleeping. I don't know. I kept thinking like he wasn't, whatever. I don't know.
It's the
Okay,
struggle
thank
when the
you.
alarm goes off. Do I hit the snooze button or do I
Oh,
get up?
but he's still getting up. He's not
Correct.
hitting this.
And that's what the
Okay.
Beinoni is. The
That
Beinoni
was
gets up. The
okay, that
tzaddik
was like,
wants to get up. The Beinoni gets up, and the Russia hits the snooze button.
gotcha. Okay, that was the part I was confused about. Thank you for
Okay,
clearing it up.
sure. So here the Alter Rebbe doubles down. Not only is a person always capable and therefore expected to, in practice, control their behavior, spoken word, and concentrated thought. It is difficult. It's really hard. It's very hard. And at this point, the Alter Rebbe is saying it's always going to be that way. It's always going to be a struggle. So I'm always going to be a late sleeper in my character, but in behavior, I'm going to get up on time. And even if I've gotten up on time every day for 20 years, I have not necessarily changed my essential character. I'm still a late sleeper. I just happen to have gotten up. So now the Beinoni's in this struggle. But here the Alter Rebbe adds even more. Not only can he, in fact, prevent the animal soul, the self-serving soul, from expressing itself in action, speech, or thought, he can even he completely dismiss that idea from his mind. So, a very simple example: the person is distracted by some thought, or some gossip, or some behavior, and they catch themselves because they're a Beinoni and they say, I'm not going to do it. But I really, really want to do it. I super duper duper want to do it. I want to do it so much. But as a human being, my head is higher than my heart. I can literally look up and not be distracted by what's staring me in the face. I can see beyond it and give me the strength to do it, to resist from doing it. But then not only can I have the strength to resist doing it, I can even completely dismiss it from my mind. I'm not going to think about that at all. And I'm going to turn it around. I'm going to go from the desires of my heart to the absolute opposite way. Uberfrat al tzaddik I'm now going to be thinking about holiness. So every time I think about yelling, mocking, whatever it is, or whatever the behavior is, whatever the thought is, I am going to use that as a trigger to now do the opposite. Now I'm going to deliberately think about Torah. Now I'm going to go and do an extra mitzvah. Now I'm going to go and do extra Torah study and so on. So we are familiar with society's use of this word, trigger. Anytime somebody says the word blueberry, I remember being traumatized by blueberry muffins, and now, I have to go seek out my therapy pet because I've been triggered, right? So we're very familiar with this idea as it is displayed and portrayed in society. Well, the Alter Rebbe has already anticipated this to the opposite. Every time I feel an inkling to do, say, or think something of pure self-service, that is going to trigger me to do an extra one. And let me just share with you from strategically, it works because the biggest fear the animal soul has is a greater commitment to bittul, to surrender of self. Remember, the animal soul is not innately opposed to Torah. If it's interesting, if it's meaningful, if I like it, as long as I do it because I like it, the animal soul's down with it. But to do it purely for the service of Hashem, that's where the animal soul becomes frightened. I don't want anything to be done that's not done only because it somehow benefits me. So imagine if I train myself that every time I start thinking about something self-serving, I do something God-serving. Well, I will now condition my animal soul to the point that it won't want to think about that because it knows every time it thinks about it, it winds up getting not only hushed, but it winds up with the opposite. So every time I think about yelling, I am extra kind, and so on, as we'll see. Now, person thinks, oh, come on, this is impossible. I mean, how can you expect that when they're dangling the pecan pie in front of my eyes, I should instead think about holiness and the service of godliness? And every time someone gets me so upset, I want to yell at them, I should instead think about acts of kindness and piety. So the Alter Rebbe brings support for this idea. Kedichsiv, like it says, now this pasuk is in the book of Koheles, which is written by Shlomo HaMelech. And the Alter Rebbe paraphrases it, which is not that uncommon because this isn't a textual analysis. But here, the Alter Rebbe leaves out a word that is not just for brevity, but there's a very particular message that the Alter Rebbe is sending. Now, the way the Alter Rebbe has it, as it's printed here, it says, "Very easy I have seen, sheyesh that there is yisrain, a virtue, lechachma min hasichlis, to wisdom over foolishness, ki yisrain ha'or min ha'cheshach, like the virtue of light over darkness." Now, if you look this up in Koheles, in the book of Koheles, you will see that the pasuk actually reads, "V'ra'isi ani," and I myself have seen. So why does the Alter Rebbe leave out the word ani and just allow it to be covered in the implication of the word V'ra'isi, which translates again as I have seen, when the original pasuk read V'ra'isi ani, I myself have seen. And so we explain that since it's Shlomo HaMelech who wrote this, a person might say, well, sure, this is true of Shlomo HaMelech. And the book of Ecclesiastes, Koheles, is in fact a very personal description of Shlomo HaMelech, sort of at the end of his life, reflecting on his experiences. So the classic thing, I can play the piano, why can't you play the piano? I speak Spanish, why don't you speak Spanish? Well, we all recognize that that's a foolish argument. So if Shlomo HaMelech is saying something, we might be tempted to say the same thing. Shlomo HaMelech, who is known as the wisest of all men, so of course he could overcome it. But you can't expect this from me. So by omitting that word, the Alter Rebbe is underscoring that this is not just a character trait true of Shlomo HaMelech that we should maybe admire, maybe aspire to. It's true of us, of every single one of us. Now, we ask the question, what is the wisdom that Shlomo HaMelech is saying here? Again, the pasuk reads, I have seen that there is a virtue to wisdom over foolishness, like the virtue of light over darkness, which prompts the question, well, isn't that obvious? Do I need Shlomo HaMelech to teach me that I'd rather be smart than stupid? I'd rather have light than darkness? what is the profundity of this message? This seems to be rather obvious. Who would disagree with this? So the Alter Rebbe is going to explain that what Shlomo HaMelech is teaching us is not just that I prefer wisdom over foolishness, like I prefer light over darkness, but that wisdom, which again, wisdom is not how many pages of Torah I know. Wisdom is the willingness to go outside of myself. Remember, as we have talked about, the ches of Chabad is chachma. Chachma anagrams to koach ma, the willingness to say what, to genuinely be amazed by something completely outside of my conditioning. And we know it because it's a very difficult thing. Learning, true learning, is difficult. It's very disruptive to my worldview. I have a way that I think about the world. It kind of works for me. Like we say, most people are mostly happy with where they are, even if they complain. Because if you say, well, if you're complaining, why don't you do something about it? They say, do something about it. What can I do? You can't do anything about it. That's the way it is. So we'd rather, not us, we're perfect, but we'd rather wallow in our current circumstance than do anything about it, because it's hard. Leaving Egypt is hard. Leaving Mount Sinai is hard. Leaving the wilderness is hard. Leaving the ark is hard. That's what Chachma is. Chachma is the willingness to have my everything sort of, my mind blown by everything, which is why, just to bear in mind, and we'll get there, it's vulnerable to bad ideas. You welcome all ideas, you get some foolish ideas, as we'll get to. But that's what we mean by Chachma. Chachma isn't that I know 50 pages and I'd rather know that, or I'd rather have a high IQ than a low IQ. It is this willingness to go completely outside of my patterns. So what does this mean? So here the Alter Rebbe expands. Peirush, this means Kamoisha or Yeshla Yisrain B'Shlitim Amshal Ala Choshech Shema'at or Gashmi Doicha Harbe Mina Choshech Shenidcha Mimenu Mi'elav Umemela. Those are two crucial words. Now these are phrases that you are familiar with because Chabad has really run with them. Which is, what Shlomo HaMelech is saying is, just as light always defeats darkness, it can never be so dark that if I light a match, I won't see. A little bit of light pushes away a lot of darkness. You certainly heard that phrase. We talk about it a lot in the Shabbos Candle campaign and in so many other areas of life. A little bit of light will push away an enormous amount of darkness. Now, the Alter Rebbe adds, not only will a little bit of light push away a lot of darkness, but it pushes it away effortlessly, memela, without effort. Again, how do we get rid of the dark? Put on the light. We just put on one little match and you can see. And again, it's hard for us because we have street lights and electric lights and so on. But if you've ever been like in a total darkness, the tiniest bit of light makes such an enormous change and difference. A little light, a match in the deepest, darkest forest makes such an enormous change. Well, this is what the Alter Rebbe says that Shlomo HaMelech is teaching us. Just like the darkness effortlessly is dismissed by a little bit of light, so too the foolishness is dismissed by a little bit of wisdom. Now, what is the foolishness? The Alter Rebbe will go on to quote, we'll get there in a little bit, but just to lay it out here, that statement in the Gemara. The Gemara says that nobody ever sins unless they are infiltrated by a spirit of foolishness. Meaning, it's never a smart idea to sin. It's fun, but it's never a smart idea. So the computer, or the calculator, we used to say, will never agree to balance your checkbook if it doesn't balance, right? It'll never agree to the math, no matter how convenient it would be. If I could just say that 2 plus 3 is 6 instead of 5, it will never go along with it. So why do we want to think that 2 plus 3 is 6 instead of 5? Because it fits my needs. then my checkbook is balanced. So we are vulnerable to being not smart, stupid. We're vulnerable to that when it fits my agenda. So nobody ever, unless the person's a sociopath, which the Alter Rebbe will talk about, that basically we can't help you. Tanya is not for somebody who's criminally insane. Nobody says, I'm going to sin and I don't care. They make an excuse. Everybody does it. It's not so bad. Whatever it is. If he's so matter of fact about it, that's frightening. But that's not generally what we're talking about. We're not talking about somebody who's at that level. So what happens? We get foolish, right? We start to think, oh, I won't get caught, and whatever it is, a million different excuses. Those excuses will never stand up to a little bit of logic. As people have probably experienced, an efficient mechanism to understanding about whether what I'm doing or not doing, of course, is to speak to a mashpia, speak to an outside person. What if that outside person isn't as smart as me? It doesn't matter. They're not caught up, meaning I have no pleasure in your foolish activity. So I can tell you it's foolish. I can't tell myself that my activity is foolish because I like it so much that I convince myself that it's a good idea. But if I come to you, or I say to people, if somebody asked you, what would you recommend in this situation? Of course, you see it as purely from the logic of it, and you say, this is a foolish thing to do. And since you have no pleasure in it, you're not distracted from its stupidity. So this is what Shlomo HaMelech says. Whatever distraction comes my way, behavior, speech, thought, it stands no chance against Chachma, which again, it's in front of me. I look up. That process is invincible, cannot be defeated. So a little bit of intellect will overcome a lot of distraction, just like a little bit of light will, and it will happen automatically. So the downside is, sorry, no excuses. You thought, oh, but how could you expect me to withstand that? Who could withstand it? He made me so angry. It was so delicious. I could make so much money. How could you expect me to withstand that temptation? And our answer is, it's never so dark that a little bit of light won't dispel that darkness. And you always have that capacity because you can always control what you willfully think about. You can't control what you enjoy, what you like, what distracts you. What you can and therefore are expected to every time control is what you willfully indulge your thinking about. So here the Alter Rebbe says, that it will similarly, effortlessly, that's the key word, push away the foolishness that comes from the left side of the heart. Remember that pattern. The left side of the heart says, I want that, but it can't figure out how to get it. So it has to send a message to the brain. So it tries to just go, just tell me what to do. Don't ask me any questions. Just tell me, how do I get what I want? And the brain has the ability to say, hold on. No, I'm not just going to answer your question. I'm going to do a little investigating. And that's what the animating, self-serving soul is terrified of. Don't start asking questions. But even the littlest question, and again, I'm sorry to bring up such a harsh example, but when the guy shows up at the flight school and says, I don't want to learn how to take off and land, I just want to learn how to fly the plane, how come nobody said, well, why do you want to do that? Because if I do, he's not going to pay the fee to my flight school. He's going to go to the next flight school. So the guy said, well, hey, it's not my job to ask these questions, and I don't have to be curious. And why? Because he's going to buy a course at my flight school. So there's some self-interest. And when there's a self-interest, I get foolish, dumb, naive. And I excuse myself. It's not my job. I don't have to ask him. I don't have to know, and so on and so forth. I mean, on the upside, there's the famous story they tell in rabbi school about the guy who comes to the rabbi and says, can I drink 4 cups of milk at the Seder instead of 4 cups of wine? The rabbi says, I'll have to look that up. And the next day, a wagon pulls up with all the supplies because he figures, why is the guy asking this? Because he can't afford, he's going to have milk. That means he can't afford to have meat. That means what the guy's really asking is that he needs financial help. So you could say, well, that's not what he said, right? But you're not entitled, you're not permitted to just be foolish and naive. You have to, and you're obligated, and you are capable of asking questions, and therefore you must ask such questions. And when you do, you see it runs away. And again, hopefully not, but I'm sure everybody's had an experience where someone has come to them with some sort of vague, kind of gotcha question that they just don't ask. I just want to know. Don't tell me. Well, don't be that one that gets lured into their trap. It's a trap. And they say, see, he told me that I could do it. I'm not playing that game. And again, a little bit of pushback, and they go down the road to the next store. They go away. And again, in the bracket, this is what we alluded to before, Kamayim Razal, like it says in the Gemara, Elim kein nichnas bei ruach shtos v'chulu. Nobody sins unless they are infiltrated by a spirit of foolishness. It's never a wise idea to sin. It's fun, but it's never wise. And a little bit of wisdom, and he goes running away. The guy comes in, and he's sort of kind of, and we have this, even in this country, not to be too distracted. The guy comes into the gun store, and he's all agitated and angry, and he's, the guy, and so on. Well, I don't know. It's not my right. You have to be responsible. You have an obligation. Well, certainly within yourself. The chachma, and the chachma is where? It's in the nefesh elokis. Why? Because the nefesh habahamis is not interested in chachma. He's interested only in pragmatic strategies and instructions for how I can get what I want. He's not interested in contemplating anything that's not self-serving. And chachma is ultimately the service of something greater than self. And the self-serving animating soul is not interested in that. He just wants to know, how is this going to get me a better thing to do, to say, to think about? But that's all he's interested in. He's only interested in, what is this going to do for me? Not what is my obligation to it, or how can it be of something greater. That's why chachma doesn't really reside in the animal soul, unless it's to think of how to build a better toy or a better invention that's going to be of the service of self. So when we say chachma here, again, we don't mean your IQ, we don't mean how many pages of Torah you've studied. We mean your willingness to go outside of yourself. And again, its passion is absolute, complete, and total dominance over the city representing the person. There's no compromise. It's not, a little bit of dirty water and a lot of clean water. You got a lot of dirty water. So there's no just a little bit. To take control of the 3 garments. Again, the 3 garments are thought, speech, and action, or action, speech, and thought. Again, the competing agendas. In the entire body, no compromise. Which the godly soul's desire is thought, speech, and action about what? 613 mitzvahs. Every thought should be a thought of godliness. Every word should be a word of godliness. Every behavior. Ba'afal PK, they say, ain't a nikvat tzaddik klal. Why can't you call him a tzaddik? And again, who does call him a tzaddik? Everybody who sees him. Remember the origin, and we'll get to this not in this chapter, but later. The whole world is telling you you're a tzaddik. Be in your eyes like a rasha. Why is the whole world telling you you're a tzaddik? Because they didn't learn Tanya. They don't know what a tzaddik is. Because that's what they see. They see is every conscious thought, is every spoken word, is every deed is absolutely in total alignment with Hashem. That's what they see. So that's why they're calling him. Not because they're flattering him, not because they don't know, because that's what they see. But Torah is telling us, and Tanya is highlighting, Don't ever think that you are beyond temptation. Maybe you're just resisting it. And again, why do we still have prison guards? There hasn't been a prison break in 20 years. Send the guards home. You send the guards home, it's game over. You let your guard down, and like the story of the man who was the high priest for 80 years, he went into the Holy of Holies, and then he gave it all up. He blew it off, became a Sadducee. You think, how is that possible? Because he let his guard down. Mimnei sheishun hazeh asher lo nefesh al kis al chayshich v'sichlas shel klipa nidcha memela eina ella b'shleishul v'shehana v'loi b'mehus v'asmusay al mehus v'asmusay shel klipa. Because, and again, this sounds like so impossible, and yet it's saying it's only, but this is what the Alter Rebbe is making us aware of. Because this superiority, and again, or this advantage, this opportunity for the foolishness to be dismissed by the light is only, and again, I know that sounds almost impossible, but it's only in the practical manifestation of the three garments. It's only in the expression of thought, speech, and action. And it's not in the very essence. So again, in secular society, the guy does something crazy and he goes on TV and he says, I'm a good person who did a bad thing. Now, I'm not even denying that. But we would say, I don't care. I don't care if you're a good person. I care about what you do. That you'd be a good person is nice too. Right? I mean, he only did it once. Right? Okay, could be, but that's not the relevant point. And we're not looking for good people. We're looking for people to do good things. Now, the Beinoni always does the good thing. And again, when I say does, I mean thought, speech, and action. His innate identity, though, is still conflicted. He's still conflicted in his innate identity. So is that okay? Is that tolerable? Well, of course, we prefer not to be that way. Of course, we prefer that we have no conflict, there be no toil. But the Alter Rebbe is not here to criticize the Beinoni and say, he's just successful in behavior, thought, speech, and action. He's here to make him aware. Because if I let my guard down, if I think, well, I am impenetrable to my self-serving soul, because every time I only do thought, speech, and action, that mistake could creep up and result in his misbehaviors, because his animal soul is constantly, vigilantly looking for a vulnerability. It's constantly and continuously looking for some vulnerability. And the vulnerability doesn't begin with, eating lobster on Yom Kippur. It begins with something that appears to be dismissively simplistic. And that's what he has to be cautious of. Look what the Alter Rebbe says here, pretty harsh kind of stuff. That the very essence and fabric of his self-serving, animating soul that's in the left side of the heart has not been dislodged at all after the davening passes. Remember, he's in this davening moment. He's all fired up. He feels total alignment with Hashem. He feels that all he ever wants is total alignment with Hashem. And again, it's true, it's sincere. But then once the davening passes and the inspiration is gone, his animating, self-serving soul is just as ferocious as it ever was. It has not been dismissed at all. Now, that is not to discredit or devalue the experience he has during the davening. Again, it's important that we not think, well, that means his davening is false because it wears off. And again, back into that example, when the person, they apologize and they say, I'll never do that again. I'm so sorry. And then they do it again. Does that mean that their remorse was untrue? Not necessarily. At that moment, they felt the tremendous sense of remorse after having seen the consequence of what they did, whatever it was that brought them to that elevated level, that they genuinely and absolutely feel complete and total remorse. But then that passes and new distractions come along and they may do it again. They may, in fact, do it again. They think, but again, if you hook them up to some sort of truth meter, when they apologize, it's sincere. It's not a phony thing. Like, what can I get away with? Snicker, snicker. I mean, obviously that can happen too. It is sincere. But then the ace mazuman, the external stimulus, passes, and they regress to the struggle. And the animal soul's always going to come up with a cleverer and smarter and wiser and subtler distraction. So the Alter Rebbe says, "She'ein rishpeish avas Hashem bezgalus liboy b'chol ha'yimini," because that fiery flame that he felt, like my example, when he set the alarm and he was so sure he's going to jump out of bed and he can't wait to go and do it, but it's gone. So now, what's the point? Well, the point is there's some residue of it, and that residue is hopefully something he can reach for and push him to get out of bed. In fact, Kim Teicher Ratzuf Ava Musuteres, because there's always that hidden love. Now, this is the first time that we've introduced this phrase. It's one that's going to be repeated many times. We have asserted as an absolute truism that every Jew longs to be aligned with Hashem. That's called love. It's not love like, oh, it's my favorite thing to do. I do it more than anything, and so on. Love is my desire to be associated therewith. Enough to push away something else that I also like doing. So I like this, I love that. The love for that will push away this. That's what love is at its entry level. Of course, there are more passionate forms of love. This love, it's part of your standard equipment. It comes with you out of the factory, just like a child longs for their parent. Everything in nature longs to return to its essence. The neshama of a Jew is an actual part of God. Therefore, it longs to be aligned with God. Why then does a person ever sin? Because it gets concealed. That love gets forgotten. When the kid breaks something or writes on the wall, my love for them gets clouded because right now I'm just annoyed and I'm upset. My love for them gets clouded. If you ask me, do you love your child? Of course. But why are you yelling? Because right now I just feel frustration. So that love is always there. It comes with you. You can't ever lose it. Now it can get lost. It can, and not lost is the wrong word. It can get concealed. You can get trapped. It is misuteris. It's hidden. Shi'aba hativius. This is the natural love. Again, it's just part of your nature. That's how you come out of the factory. Common in the godly soul. Again, why? Because the godly soul is part of God, and just like a child loves their parent, all of nature regresses to its origin. The godly soul longs to be aligned with God. So since that external stimulus is gone, that fiery enthusiasm that he felt, this great love for Hashem, is not there. Well, that animal soul that he thought he had eliminated, it was just hiding. He knew he wasn't going to get you to eat lobster on Kol Nidre. He didn't even bother. But could he potentially get you to hit the snooze button? Could he potentially get you to raise your voice? Could he potentially get you to be harsh? Yeah. So he comes roaring back. And again, like my analogy, when the alarm goes off, I can't even remember what you're talking about. Why did I ever set the alarm for this early hour? That whole experience seems so foreign. So that he could even desire to do something that's an indulgence. Now, a permitted indulgence he might do. A prohibited indulgence he would never do, a sin. But he might play with it in his mind for a moment. He wouldn't ever actually think of robbing the bank. But he might indulge in, well, I wonder how I would rob the bank. What would I do with all that money? And how much fun would it be? And how could I get away with it? And so on. Now, he's not going to actually rob a bank, but he might play with the idea in his head for a moment. Why? Because that fiery passion with godliness is a faint, distant memory. Razal, like it says in the Gemara, that there are Gimel Avedas and Nitzuman B'chol Yom, there are three sins that nobody is, and here's the key word, protected from. That's a key word, which we'll talk about in the day, which are thinking about sin, being intent in his davening and being distracted from that. And it doesn't mention the third one. The third one is gossip or things that are on the fringe of gossip. They're not literally gossip, they're just sort of on the fringe of it. Now, it doesn't say that there are three Averos that everybody does every day. It just says there are three Averos that nobody is rescued from, protected from. Meaning they're going to annoy you. Doesn't mean you're going to do it. And just because it annoys you every single time doesn't mean I have to react. You know, if the guy's knocking on the door, knocking on the door, knocking on the door, that you can't stop. You know, there was this great comic strip. This mother is pushing these two kids in the shopping cart. And the kid says, "Can we have candy?" No. Next panel. "Can we have candy?" No. Next panel. "Can we have candy?" "I'll think about it." Next panel. "Can we have candy?" And his brother says, "Quiet. She said yes already." Because once you're willing to think about it, that's it, right? Now he's going to keep saying, "Can we have candy? Can we have candy?" And you're going to have to say, "No, no, 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 no." And that may go on forever. That may go on forever. So when the person has this passion, he doesn't even hear it. But when that passion is gone, it's going to keep knocking and knocking and knocking on the door. Yiras Hashem v'ava ha'mesuteres b'chol ha'yamini. L'skaber v'lishlei l'ara hazeh ha'masava taiva shloi lias l'shlitu b'mshol b'ir l'tziyah tavasi ha'mekayach ha'lapayel l'slabish b'evi aguf. V'afil b'moich levado l'hara b'ra. Ein l'shlitu b'mshol l'hara chas v'sholem b'ritzonish b'moichai. This is where the value comes in. So you might say, so what's the point? What's the point of going on vacation? I'm just going to come back and there's going to be more work. What's the point of having fun? I'm just going to come back. The answer is that there's a residue of that experience. So like my analogy, the alarm goes off. I don't feel like getting out of bed. I'd rather just lay in bed. But I remember that there was a time, and I remember it, and I reach for that. That's hidden deep in my heart. Right now, I don't want to do it. Right now, I want to indulge in whatever that indulgence is. But I reach back into that moment that I remember how enthusiastic I was, even though that feels so completely foreign to me right now. I reach back for that, and that will get me over the hump. So I will not, I say, no, I am not going to think about robbing the bank. I'm not going to even play around with that in my mind. I'm not going to let my mind be distracted, even for a few minutes, and think, wouldn't that be fun if we could do some bad thing? I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to allow it to have any authority because I know how it is. It tells me I just want to pretend, think about it, and then I'll leave you alone. He's lying because once he thinks about it, he wants to think about it more. You know, this is the sign of indulgences. The more the person gives into them, the more they want. Nobody eats one potato chip. That's it. They want one, now they want another one. It just evokes more and more and more and more. It's a lie when it says, I'm just going to start there. I'm not letting you in at all. No. Can I have candy? Can I have candy? No, 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 no. And any hesitation is an invitation. Here is that this impulse comes from the heart to the mind. Ella, what am I going to do? Miyad, immediately. That's the key word here. Immediately. Baliyose l'sham, when it shows up there, when it comes from the heart to the head, and says, again, let's think about robbing the bank or whatever it is. Doicha b'shtei yadayim. He completely pushes it away. He's not going to allow it to come there at all. Umasiach daito miyad. And he immediately dismisses it from his head. How? How does he do that? Sheniska, because he remembers. Shuhira Ra, that this comes from evil, because I can always be in control of my conscious thoughts. So again, I'm sorry for the analogy, but when they show up at the flight school, I don't get to be dumb. And I say, no, I know that means I'm losing a customer. And I know it's, none of my business. No, I get to say no. When the kids show up on Halloween and they want to buy eggs, no, I'm not selling it to you. No, it's not okay. No, that's a hard thing. He's not willingly going to tolerate it at all. I feel laharabai baratzin. Even just to think about it. Again, it's harmless. I'm just thinking about it. Wouldn't it be fun to rob the bank? Or even to think, God forbid, that he would actually do it. He's not even going to pretend it. He's not going to let it infiltrate his mind. It's not there. We have the capacity, shoftim, v'shotrim, to put up judges and police at our gates. That is the gates of our body, what I'm going to look at, what I'm going to listen to. And if somebody says, I'm going to do it, I get to say, no, you're not going to do that. I'm not going to be party to that. I'm not going to be bullied into it or bamboozled into it. Or feel a daber boy, or just to talk about it. We're just talking. Why? Because if I willfully engage in it, at that moment I'm disconnected from Hashem. Imagine your friend would say, what are you thinking about? Well, I'm thinking about stealing your watch. I mean, I'm not going to do it, but I'm just thinking about it. What's the problem? Because at that moment I'm disconnected. At that moment I am disconnected from you. Imagine I'm in shul, say, what are you thinking about? I'm thinking about, going to shopping or whatever it is. I'm disconnected at that moment, and the Beinoni does not want and will not allow himself to be disconnected, even for a moment. Again, I'm gonna actually do it. I wouldn't really steal your watch. It doesn't matter. At that moment, my thoughts are not towards godliness, and therefore that is a violation. Same thing, people to people. At that moment, when I feel some anger towards this person, or some sort of disgust towards this person, or jealousy of this person. Why do they have all the good things and I don't have it? Or kas, or I'm angry at the person. Or kapeda, or I hold a grudge against it, and I am justified. You know what he did to me last week? And I feel absolute justification for it. As soon as I sense that, I'm not letting that into my thoughts. I am not going to think about that. I am not going to let that consume my mind. But moichai in his mind, or in his passion. Ba'adrab, on the contrary. Again, this is that key phrase. Hamoyach shalit alalev. The mind rules the heart. It may have to overrule it and say, no, I'm not letting you in. Hopefully, of course, it does more than overrule it, but it transforms it, it matures it, and so on. What am I going to do? Do the exact opposite. I feel anger towards this guy, I'm going to be kind to him. I feel jealousy, I'm going to admire him. Remember triggering. I'm going to condition my animal soul. Every time my animal soul says to be angry, I'm going to be kind. Every time he says to be jealous, I'm going to be admiring. He's going to stop doing it because I've conditioned the animal soul, just like the dog. Every time he chews up the couch, I swat him on the snout with the newspaper. He stops doing it. Well, I'm going to train my animal soul the same way. Every time it gives me the inkling to be petty, I'm going to be magnanimous. Every time it gives me the inkling to be stingy, I'm going to be generous, whatever it is. Ad to the most absolute extreme. And not to be angry. And not even to treat the guy the way he treats me, which would be quote unquote fair or reasonable. Now, again, this is not suggesting that a person put himself in danger or associate himself or be taken advantage of. But we're talking about the character. I can just dismiss the guy, which is what annoys him the most anyway. So I get to indulge in that. But El Adrab, on the contrary, Ligmo lechayavim toivos. I am going to treat the liable with goodness. Even though they're totally wrong, they're totally bad, I'm going to treat them with goodness. Like the Zohar gives us the classic example, which is Yosef with his brothers. Now, curiously, Yosef has a moniker. We have Abraham Avinu, Moshe Rabbeinu, David HaMelech. Yosef has a title too. He's the only one who has it, which is Yosef HaTzadik. So why doesn't the Alter Rebbe give him his full props? Because the Alter Rebbe anticipates, Yosef, he's a tzaddik. You just told me I can't be a tzaddik. It's not because Yosef was a tzaddik. What do we learn from Yosef? If anybody had justification for being grumpy with his brothers, it was Yosef. Right? Look what they did to him. And not only did he not hold a grudge against them, but he treated them with magnanimous generosity, even after Yaakov died, and they thought, oh, well, boy, now he's going to get us. And Yosef's message to them is kind of a curious one. The brothers came and they said, we sinned. And Yosef's like, you don't need my forgiveness. That's not the problem. You got a deeper problem. That's your problem, that you sold your brother. Me, I see it as Hashem sent me here. You didn't sell me here, Hashem sent me here. But that doesn't let you off the hook because you guys got a problem that you sold your brother. That's your problem that you have to work out with Hashem. That's not my problem. So you want my forgiveness? My forgiveness is not meaningful because I don't see it as what you did. I'm not a victim of your action. I am under the direction of Hashem. I wasn't sold here. I was sent here by Hashem. And you brothers, you got it your own problem. So Yosef's actions of being magnanimous to his brothers are the lesson, not only because it's the nice thing to do, it also, again, becomes the strategy for how we condition the self-serving, animating soul to not be so self-serving. Because it's not going to, every time it says to do it, I do the opposite, it stops doing it. But the struggle will forever be there. And now we are into the message of the Beinoni, and that's really where the next basically 5 chapters are going to take us to really discover what the Beinoni is. All right.